We've just left the harbor where American Mussel is located, and we're steaming out to Saltwater Farms, which is our shellfish farm located in the East Pass of Narragansett Bay. We're about 6 miles up the coastline north of Newport. At Saltwater Farms, it's a long line technology. Underneath each one of those floats that you see there are a stack of 10 oyster trays. In each of those sets of trays, there are somewhere in the order of 1,500 to 2,000 Quonset point oysters growing. We also grow beaver tail oysters on the farm as well. You can see in the distance there the farming vessel, the New Hope. It is actually a Novi-style lobster boat, which we've modified to service the farm's longline technology. And some of the modifications are the mast and boom that you see there. As we get a little closer, you'll see the star wheels onto which the long lines are set, and the boat moves along much like a row of corn in a cornfield. But we're kind of inverted everything in that we're farming in the third dimension. The farm is floated with the flotation, and the stacks of oyster trays are set in the water column in the third dimension. This is a typical farming operation in the sense that the oyster trays will start to accumulate what we call fouling organisms. It's just a whole host of marine plants and animals that will set on the oyster gear and eventually grow to a point where they'll restrict the flow of water to the oysters inside the trays. What we're doing is power washing, which is the sea equivalent of weeding or tilling a farm. We clean the fouling organisms off of the trays. We open up those perforations in the trays to allow the flow of water to the oysters. Keep in mind that oysters, like all shellfish, are filter feeders, and they open and they filter microscopic green plants from the water, and they serve a very significant ecological function in doing so, because most coastal bodies of water are over-nutrified with too much nitrogen, and there's all these plankton blooms that occur and not enough filter-feeding organisms to remove them from the water. With a shellfish farm, you've effectively introduced a very efficient filtering system, which one converts nitrogen into very edible animal protein, and it clears the water such that plant life can grow, and you provide a very wholesome food to the marketplace. In this scene, we're seeing shaking the oysters, and that chips the new growth off of the shell and forces the oyster to form a deeper cup and a more rounded shaped oyster, or a choice oyster. Whereas in the wild, that action wouldn't happen, and the oysters tend to grow long and narrow and thin, and they're not as desirable as a half-shell item for the high-end restaurant markets. So each of these trays are handled every 30 days in the growing season. They're cleaned, they're power washed. We shake the oysters, we thin them out if there's too many in there. We have over 7,000 of these trays in the water at any point in time. We handle them enough to where we're creating this perfect Quonset point oyster and beaver tail oyster for the half-shell trade.